Hello, good afternoon, good morning. We wanted to discuss with you some of the changes that have happened in the Middle East due to the Iranian missile strike on Israel that took place on the 1st of October. We wanted to start by giving you a little bit of context. Iran and the United States, as I'm sure you know, have been locked in a proxy conflict in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, where the United States really has been on the losing side. It was Iran's local allies that ended up carrying the day in each of these countries and gaining dominant positions. This has forced the United States to fight in order to preserve its position in the Middle East. And part of that fight was for the United States to authorize Israel to escalate the war that began in Gaza much more forcefully towards Lebanon. And we saw the assassinations of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, of Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, and of other Hezbollah leaders in that context. The Israelis, with American backing, are committed to changing the strategic situation in the north in general, meaning Lebanon and Syria, and this requires them to escalate a lot further, including against Syria, with the aim of cutting off the link between Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon that enables Iran to act immediately on the Israeli border. Iran can't afford to lose Hamas or Hezbollah because these are its main deterrent against Israel, short of a nuclear weapon. And this is why the Iranians struck so hard yesterday on the 1st of October and fired around 180 to 250 missiles traveling at Mach 4, so a little bit short of hypersonic speed, which is Mach 5. And the Iranians struck targets all over Israel. This was a partly successful strike. The Israelis have acknowledged that air bases, including especially the administrative buildings and maintenance depots, were hit. This reflects an impressive level of precision by the Iranians. There are reports by the Palestinians in Gaza that Israeli targets within Gaza were struck, meaning that there is an intelligence loop from Gaza all the way to Tehran. Again, an impressive feat for the Iranians. This is a big morale boost for Hezbollah and Hamas, and it places serious pressure on Israel to retaliate. Now, where does this leave us? Let's discuss the forecasts and the commercial impact of what we're seeing. Before that, though, I wanted to discuss our track record for a couple of moments. We've been saying that this regional war was coming since at least August 2022. We said it again in March 2023 and in April 2023, at a time when the mainstream view, including the view from Israeli intelligence, was that Hamas and Hezbollah are deterred and they're not going to fight a war against Israel. When the war started, we said that the Israelis are not going to achieve their declared objectives. We never doubted Israel's ability to inflict enormous damage and cause massive destruction. We just said that Israel couldn't achieve its declared political objectives, which were to release the hostages by force and to dismantle Hamas completely. And a year later, so far, this is true. After the first Iranian strike against Israel in April, we said that there were going to be more rounds of these kinds of exchanges. Turned out to be true. And after Netanyahu's visit to the United States in July 2024, we said that he has received permission for major escalation in the region. And this is the series of assassinations targeting Hezbollah and Hamas that we've seen since then. Other things that we said that the Iranians and the Saudis will reconcile under Chinese auspices. This has happened, obviously. We said it at a time when the very idea was crazy. We said that this is going to damage relations with the United States. We'll see if that turns out to be true. We said when the war started that Egypt is set to receive a big, nice payout bailout, which they did receive. When the Russians invaded Ukraine, we said that the sanctions on Russia would not work and that Russia would become more autonomous economically. And we said that the 2023 Ukrainian counteroffensive would fail and that the 2024 Kursk adventure, shall we say, would backfire. And these have both proven to be true. We have some other interesting forecasts that we can discuss with you. We don't think that the United States is stable at all. We think political instability in the US is a big issue, up to the point of civil war in the coming decade. We are relatively confident that China will make a military move against Taiwan by 2030 or in the next 5 years. We're saying that Iran and Turkey will be in a large conflict if the US withdraws, and that this might affect the Kurdistan regional government. And time will tell if these forecasts prove to be true, but we would be glad to discuss them with you. Now, going back to the United States and Iran and why we think a showdown is inevitable, well, mainly because the two sides have called each other's bluffs. The US warned Iran against attacking Israel. The Iranians ignored it. Now the US has to put up or shut up. And if it doesn't put up, then it looks like a poor security guarantor. Our view really is that the Pentagon is itching for a fight with Iran, and that with Joe Biden distracted by his illness and Kamala Harris by the election, we think that the Pentagon is driving policy and that this is quite an escalatory policy. So we think that the Israelis will retaliate to the strike they received from Iran, and that the Iranians will strike back in turn, and that the US won't back down because it can't have Iran be the dominant player in the Middle East given its alliance with Russia and China, and because as a maritime power, the United States must retain control over the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, and this now is threatened. And the only way to address this is to address the problem at its source, which is Iran. In terms of indicators of escalation, militarily, all of our indicators are flashing. We're seeing the US engaged in a serious buildup in the region. They've got 2 aircraft carriers there, etc. If we see the Americans talking about coalition building, if we see more strikes on Syrian air defense, if we see the Russians jumping into the picture by providing Iran with anti-ship or anti-air capability, this would confirm our view that escalation is likely. On the other hand, if in the next month or so the Israelis take 50 to 100 or maybe more casualties in Lebanon, then this would perhaps convince them to end the war and to de-escalate, and that would relieve us of having to fight a regional war. Similarly, if we saw escalation in other parts of the world that draws the United States, I can only think of Taiwan as being something that would require the US to redirect its energies. That would be de-escalatory. Similarly, if there was political instability in the US over the elections or instability within Iran. Now, as we were saying, we expect escalation in the region to continue between Iran and the United States, and we wanted to talk a little bit about the implications for different countries in the region. We believe that there's going to be a Jordan for Syria equation. If the US, Israel, try to cut off Syria from Iraq by basically expanding the Syrian civil war again, the Iranian retaliation will involve Jordan. The message would be, if you try to cut us off from Lebanon, we will destabilize Israel's longest border, and that will make any changes in Syria completely irrelevant. This would be how we think the Iranians would counter such a situation. We also think that Jordan is more and more vulnerable because of its participation in interdicting missiles that are headed into Israel. It's twice that the Jordanians have been involved in this. We think this is going to cause Iran to act against them, and because the Jordanians are providing a major lifeline to Israel by having truck routes open into the country. We think US interests in Iraq, including energy and contractors and so on, are at severe risk of kidnappings and attacks. And we think that if the US were to attack Iran directly, then American bases, including in Kuwait and in Iraq, would be part of Iran's escalation plan. Kuwait is extremely vulnerable to attacks from Iraq, and we think that this would be a given if things got really serious between Iran and the United States. In the GCC, we think that US bases in countries like Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE would definitely be a target for Iranian retaliation if it was attacked by the United States. There's a scenario where the Iranians attack critical infrastructure, including energy, in the Gulf in order to force Gulf states to expel the United States and its forces. Obviously, the Strait of Hormuz would be severely affected in any American-Iranian conflict. The general principle here is that if the US or Israel try to shut down Iranian energy exports, Iran would respond in kind and would respond against the Gulf states and try to impose some kind of energy blockade. This has been the Iranian policy since President Rouhani, when I believe in 2018, 2017, 2018, he was making it clear that if the Iranians cannot export oil, then nobody in the region can export oil. We think this is still the position of Iran. The Iranians may be sophisticated about this, allowing exports only to friendly countries and trying to disrupt exports to other countries, meaning that the situation in the Red Sea would become a lot worse. In any Iran-US escalation, risks to aviation would be quite severe, and we can discuss that in some detail. We note that the Iranians have a history in accidentally shooting down jets, and so there would be perhaps more of that, and that under intense enough fire, some Gulf operators of air defense may or may not act in the way that you might wish for. Moving to the Red Sea, in a very bizarre decision, Starlink announced that it's going to begin operating in the Middle East, and the first country it will operate in is Yemen. This is obviously not a commercial decision. The client here is probably the Pentagon, and the idea would be to help the militias in Yemen have better communication so that they can take on the Houthi more effectively. So we see the civil war in Yemen starting. And we see the Yemenis trying to disrupt that by cutting off the financing, by attacking the Gulf countries, especially Saudi Arabia and the UAE, with the idea being, if you sponsor our enemies, we will attack you directly. Plus, we don't see any reason for the Houthis to stop their attacks on shipping in any time soon. And there's nobody who can stop them unless the ground is taken, unless there's a ground campaign against them. And so this is why the US is in the process of building some kind of ground force that can take on the Houthi. The US has failed in doing this kind of thing in Yemen and in Syria in the past, and so failure here is quite a real possibility. We think that a Middle East war would have global implications, mainly affecting Russia, Ukraine, and Taiwan. The US having to use a lot more air defense in the Middle East would mean that the Ukrainians are even more exposed, and so their front lines will crumble even faster. The Russians are trying to reach Odessa, and that is their main objective, because then they would be a much more effective player in the Black Sea. They would be much less vulnerable. Crimea would be a lot safer, and they would have a border with European countries that, unlike the Baltic states, are not reflexively hostile. And this might lead to a change in European politics that favors the Russians. For China and Taiwan, we would note that Iranian American escalation is the perfect opportunity for China. Um, Having the US get bogged down in the Middle East's quicksand would be a gift from heaven to China. And it would be the moment that they were looking for to be able to move on Taiwan. We're pretty convinced that a war where China forces reunification with Taiwan is quite likely if it doesn't happen politically, if unification doesn't happen politically. And we think that a big distraction for the United States, such as a major conflict in the Middle East, would be the opportunity the Chinese are looking for. And they would look to transfer weapons to Iran that help it fight the United States more effectively, both to test those weapons and to weaken the US's ability to counter them in Taiwan. We note that Taiwan is the key to securing shipping for Japan and South Korea, and so a conflict in Taiwan would have massive implications for global supply chains and for shipping and aviation. And then finally, thinking about implications in Europe and in the West, if we end up in a situation where the United States is fighting alongside Israel against a major Muslim power like Iran, um, obviously we would expect rioting in Muslim areas. Birmingham comes to mind, some of the French banlieue come to mind, Brussels comes to mind. There would most certainly be a reaction from the Muslim community that would make the pro-Palestine protests and riots considerably worse. We can map this using a combination of demographic data, income data, crime data, data from previous riots, etc., and we would be happy to discuss this with you. We've begun work with an exceptional modeling team, and this is something that's right up our alley. We would obviously see increased terrorism risks targeting Jews, weapons companies, synagogues, from a combination of lone actors and state-sponsored actors. This would backfire in the sense that right-wing parties would be more likely to win future elections, and these parties are now increasingly vocal in demands for remigration, demands to send people back to where they came from, essentially. And the ascendance of such parties would have strong implications on relations with Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom, obviously. And finally, I wanted to thank you very much for listening. I hope you found this thorough and interesting. I remind you that we always work on producing commercially focused, timely, actionable forecasts that enable you to do business in challenging times and in challenging environments. We are certainly in challenging times, and you do operate in challenging environments. We have different packages. We work with clients on a regular retainer basis where we provide them things like quarterly briefings, quarterly reports, and support during crises such as this one. And we also offer elite packages where we produce tailored work that focuses on risk score reviews in order to make sure that they're analytically coherent. Obviously, if you've missed all of the big developments in the region, your risk scores are not going to be that great. We've helped clients with risk mapping, with scenario modeling, with training and coaching of staff to help them understand geopolitical risk a little bit better. And we welcome you reaching out, and we look forward to collaborating with you in the future. Thank you very much for your time, and have a great day.